The jungle hummed with an eerie rhythm, an ecosystem indifferent to the presence of an interloper. The air was thick with alien flora, luminescent vines pulsating in bioluminescent hues as they coiled around blackened tree trunks. In the distance, the screech of something predatory shattered the suffocating silence, but Elias Carter did not flinch. He crouched low, sweat slicking his brow, eyes darting through the dense undergrowth. The Varis had dropped him here with a single directive: survive the hunt. The weight of unseen eyes pressed against his back, but there was no turning to meet their gaze. He knew better. Somewhere just beyond the veil of shadows, they were watching, studying, judging. The Varis were master hunters, their warriors revered throughout the known galaxy, and humanity had made the mistake of catching their interest. They had taken him from the wreckage of the Osiris, stripping him of weapons, rations, and every human convenience he had once relied on. This was no mere execution. This was a test, a spectacle, a game. And Alex was the prey. His fingers curled into the damp soil, feeling the earth beneath him. 12 hours, that was the head start he had been given before they released the Vaxil. The name alone sent ice through his veins. These creatures were more than beasts. They were something else, something engineered with terrifying precision. He had seen glimpses of them when the Varis had paraded them through the camp, their muscular quadrupedal frames moving like liquid shadow, their skull-like visages devoid of any recognizable emotion. They did not hunt with sight. They hunted with sound, scent, and something deeper, something primal, a connection woven through pheromones and subharmonic frequencies, their intelligence alien yet undeniable. The first few humans dropped onto this world had been slaughtered within hours, their remains left as grim ornaments of the Varis's amusement. But Alex had no intention of becoming another carcass on their wall. He exhaled slowly, forcing down the gnawing dread clawing at the edges of his mind. Panic was the first step toward death. If he was to outwit them, he needed to think beyond instinct. He had to be unpredictable, something they could not anticipate. The jungle offered little in the way of human familiarity. The air smelled metallic, thick with spores from towering fungi that pulsed with each breath of wind. The ground was treacherous, shifting in ways that suggested something beneath it was alive, waiting. He had marked the trees he passed with jagged cuts from a sharp stone, not for his own benefit, but to mislead his hunters. He had learned from the brief observation of the Vaxil that they communicated through more than one sense. If they relied on pheromone trails, he would alter them. If they tracked heartbeats, he would find a way to mask his own. A distant, resonant chime reverberated through the jungle, a sound so deep it rattled through his bones. His breath hitched. The hunt had begun. Far above, nestled in the monolithic observation spires, the Varis watched with cold amusement. Their mandibles clicked in quiet anticipation, their eyes reflecting the data streaming in from the Vaxil's neural feeds. They had seen countless species run, countless species die, their screams etched into the annals of entertainment. But there was something about this human, a flicker of defiance, an ember of unpredictability, that made them pause. In the darkness of the jungle, Elias Carter moved, and for the first time in the Varis's long history of the hunt, something unforeseen took shape. The chime faded into the dense atmosphere, replaced by a stillness that felt unnatural. The jungle, once alive with distant calls of its native inhabitants, now held its breath. Elias Carter knew what that meant. The Vaxil were here. He pressed himself against the coarse bark of an alien tree, forcing his breathing into a slow, measured rhythm. His heartbeat pounded against his ribs, a traitorous drum announcing his presence to the creatures now hunting him. The first mistake he could make was assuming this was like any survival training he had endured before. This wasn't a test of endurance, it was a test of intelligence. A rustle, low, deliberate, shifted the foliage somewhere to his left. Not a mistake, a warning. They knew he was close. They wanted him to know. Alex tightened his grip on the sharpened stone in his hand, though he knew it would do little against creatures designed to tear through reinforced plating. He had no weapons, no advanced tech, just his mind. But if there was one thing that humanity excelled at, it was adaptation. His eyes flicked to the uneven terrain, the damp soil still holding the footprints of smaller creatures that had fled the area. He could use that. Shifting his weight, he slid one foot back, letting his heel sink soundlessly into the loose dirt before pivoting sharply. The moment he moved, a blur of motion erupted from the underbrush. The first Vaxil lunged, its elongated limbs propelling it forward with unnatural grace. Its body was sleek, muscular, covered in a dark, chitinous exoskeleton that absorbed the ambient light. Its skull-like visage split open, revealing a mouth lined with needle-like fangs. No eyes, no ears, only ridges along its spine that pulsed. As it tracked him through other means, Alex threw himself sideways as claws slashed through the space he had occupied a second before. The beast didn't pause. It adjusted, shifting its trajectory mid-air, twisting its body in an impossible display of agility. It was already learning. Alex crashed into the ground, rolling through the damp foliage, mud clinging to his arms and a chest. He had seconds before it struck again. His fingers grasped for anything, a rock, a branch, when he felt something slimy beneath his palm. He didn't think. He just acted. In one fluid motion, he hurled the slick mass toward the Vaxil. The creature recoiled as the substance struck its face, releasing a wet, squelching noise. The alien predator staggered, its ridges quivering violently. Alex had no idea what he had just thrown. Some kind of fungus, perhaps. But the reaction told him everything he needed. The creatures weren't invincible. He didn't waste time marveling at the revelation. His body was already in motion, sprinting through the jungle with a singular focus: distance. But even as he ran, he knew this was only the beginning. The Vaxil weren't just hunting him, they were studying him, and he had just given them something new to learn. The jungle pulsed with unseen energy, a living organism in its own right, shifting and adapting just as he was. Elias Carter moved through the dense foliage with purpose, his mind racing faster than his feet. The Vaxil had recoiled from the fungal mass he had thrown, but he knew that momentary advantage wouldn't last. They were learning. The first attack had been calculated, probing his defenses, his reactions. They weren't just mindless hunters, they were something far worse, intelligent, adaptive. He could almost feel their networked consciousness recalibrating, sharing information between them through whatever neural link tied their pack together. Alex needed to change the game before they did. He slowed his pace, crouching behind the wide, gnarled roots of an alien tree, taking in the environment with new eyes. The jungle was not his enemy. It was a battlefield. The damp, spore-laden air carried the scent of decay and life intermingled, the terrain shifting. With hidden dangers and opportunities, he needed to use it. His fingers brushed against the remnants of the fungi he had used before. It had been sheer luck that it worked, but now he needed to turn that luck into a strategy. He scraped as much of the gelatinous substance onto his arms and chest, ignoring the cold, slimy texture. If it confused the Vaxil's senses, maybe it could mask his presence. A low vibration rolled through the ground beneath him. Not sound, something deeper, a pulse that he felt in his bones. Communication. They were signaling to each other, and they were closing in. He couldn't keep running. They would track his exhaustion, drive him into a dead end. He needed to make them question their own instincts. Alex shifted through the undergrowth, marking his path with deliberate false trails. He snapped branches, smeared mud in uneven patterns, and doubled back in irregular loops. Every move was designed to disrupt the logical flow of the hunt, to inject human unpredictability into their methodical process. Then he prepared his trap. The jungle offered little in the way of traditional weaponry, but it had its own arsenal. He scavenged sharp rocks, thorn-covered vines, and the sticky remnants of the fungi. He laced the ground with trip hazards, set crude snares where the foliage was densest, and finally he placed himself in the most vulnerable position he could. Out, in the open. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, movement. The first Vaxil emerged, its exoskeleton shifting like liquid shadow, its body moving in near-perfect silence. Its ridges flared, sensing the environment, processing the altered terrain. It hesitated for a fraction of a second. Exactly what Alex had counted on. A sudden snap, one of the tripwires he had set, tightened around the creature's leg, yanking it sideways into a thorn-covered root system. The Vaxil let out a high-pitched, chittering screech, its body thrashing as the barbs clung to its exoskeleton, restricting movement. The second one reacted immediately, shifting tactics. No longer stalking, it lunged. Alex was already moving. He ducked under its sweeping claws, driving a jagged rock into the soft joint of its limb. The beast snarled, ichor splattering across his arms. He twisted the rock deeper before rolling away, narrowly avoiding its counterattack. The momentary victory was short-lived. A third Vaxil had stayed back, watching, learning. The instant Alex tried to reposition, it struck with terrifying speed, knocking him off his feet. His back slammed against the ground, the breath ripped from his lungs. The creature loomed over him, its ridges quivering, its maw opening in a soundless snarl. Then it hesitated, its head tilted slightly, as if studying him more closely. Not as prey, as something else. The realization struck Alex like a physical blow. He had disrupted their patterns. He had forced them into an unfamiliar state of mind. Uncertainty, and uncertainty was a weapon. He grinned, bloodied and breathless, as the Vaxil above him made its choice. The hunt was no longer one-sided. It had become a war of minds. The jungle held its breath. Elias Carter lay sprawled against the damp, pulsing earth, the weight of the Vaxil looming over him. Its ridges flared and quivered, processing his every micro-movement, but it did not strike. Not immediately. It was thinking. The realization sent a cold thrill through Alex's spine. The hunt was no longer about speed or strength. It was a battle of adaptation. And for the first time, the Vaxil hesitated. A mistake. Alex exploded into motion, twisting his body beneath the creature's frame and driving both feet upward, slamming into the exposed underbelly, where the exoskeleton plates thinned. The Vaxil let out a chittering snarl, its balance momentarily thrown. That was all he needed. He rolled, grasping at the ground for anything. His fingers met the coarse vines he had spread earlier. With a sharp yank, the tension snapped, triggering the second layer of his trap. Barbed roots lashed upward, tearing into the Vaxil's limbs. It recoiled, limbs spasming as the organic matter clung to its joints like living restraints. Alex scrambled to his feet, lungs burning, heart hammering. He had survived longer than the others. He had done what no other prey had. He had made them hesitate, but hesitation was not surrender. A tremor rippled through the jungle. They were coming. The others had sensed the shift in the hunt, their networked intelligence reacting to Alex's unorthodox tactics. What they had once pursued as mere prey had become something unaccounted for, something that required a different kind of strategy. They were done toying with him. The foliage burst open, and the second Vaxil surged forward. This one did not hesitate. It moved with terrifying precision, adjusting its attack mid-stride, its claws a blur of motion. Alex barely dodged, the wind of its strike grazing his shoulder. Pain flared as the edge of its claw caught flesh, a sharp, burning slice. He gritted his teeth and pushed forward, using momentum over power. He wasn't faster, he wasn't stronger, but he was unpredictable. He feinted left, then twisted at the last second, using the creature's own weight against it. It skidded, momentarily thrown off course, and in that heartbeat of vulnerability, Alex acted. His hands grasped at the fungal remnants he had gathered earlier. He crushed them against the Vaxil's ridges, smearing the substance across its skin. The reaction was immediate. Its entire body shuddered, ridges spasming violently. The spores disrupted whatever sensory web it relied on, leaving it flailing, confused. The jungle shook again. The third Vaxil stood at the edge of the clearing, still watching, calculating. It did not charge. It observed. It was learning from its fallen packmates, its neural ridges pulsing in rapid succession. Then it did something unexpected. It stepped back, not in fear, in acknowledgement. Alex's breath caught in his throat. This was different. This was new. The Vaxil did not just kill, they understood. He had forced them to see him as more than prey. But what did that mean? Far above, within their monolithic observation spires, the Varis watched in silence. Their mandibles clicked in muted disbelief as data streamed through their neural implants. This had never happened before. The Vaxil should have finished the hunt. Instead, they hesitated. One of the Varis, a huntmaster, exhaled sharply and whispered a single word. Unacceptable. The jungle erupted in a flash of blue light. A new chime, deeper and more resonant, pulsed through the air. The Vaxil froze, their ridges stiffened, their bodies locking into rigid, unnatural postures. Alex's stomach sank. A command override. The Varis were forcing their creations back under control. No, not now. He had almost broken the system, almost shifted the balance. The Vaxil turned back toward him, but something had changed in their movements. The hesitation, the curiosity. It was gone. Now they were just weapons again. Alex clenched his fists. He had fought too hard to be reduced to prey once more. The Varis thought they had won. They were wrong. He wasn't done yet. The jungle quivered with an unnatural silence. The Vaxil, once living nightmares of sinew and shadow, now stood motionless, their ridges dimmed, their intelligence shackled beneath the invisible leash of their Varis masters. The thrill of the hunt had been ripped away, replaced by cold obedience. Alex Carter's hands curled into fists. He had fought. He had adapted. He had made them hesitate. And now, in an instant, the Varis had undone everything. No. He refused to accept it. The deep chime resonated again, pulsing through the jungle like an execution bell. The Vaxil's limbs tensed, claws flexing, recalibrating. Their intelligence, their instincts, their choice had been stripped from them. The Varis were making sure this hunt ended the way they intended. Alex's breath came slow and steady as his mind raced. They were watching. The Varis thought they had reasserted control, but they didn't understand what they had just done, because he hadn't just been studying the Vaxil, he had been studying them. His fingers ghosted over the slimy, fungal remnants still smeared on his arms. His heartbeat thrummed against his ribs. The spores had disrupted the Vaxil's senses, but what if their connection to the Varis was just another kind of signal? A frequency, a pathway, and frequencies could be jammed. He didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, slamming his hands into the nearest Vaxil, smearing the remaining spores into its ridges. It twitched violently, limbs spasming as the blue glow in its body flickered. Alex barely had time to move before the second Vaxil lunged at him, only to stop mid-strike, its body convulsing, its ridges flared wildly, erratic pulses crackling across its exoskeleton. It was fighting back. The spores weren't just blocking their senses, they were disrupting the override command. Alex's mind snapped into focus. They weren't weapons, they were prisoners, and he had just given them a key. Above, the Varis monitors flared with alerts. Data surged through the observation spires as huntmasters rushed to adjust their controls. This wasn't possible. The override command was absolute. The Vaxil were mind-bound, but the human had introduced something they hadn't anticipated, an anomaly. The third Vaxil, the one that had hesitated before, now shook violently. Its ridges pulsed out of sync with the others, a static charge rolling off its frame. Then, in a sudden, terrifying burst, it howled, not in pain, in defiance. The force of the sound hit Alex like a shockwave. The jungle trembled beneath its cry. The other Vaxil jerked, their ridges flaring, their bodies trembling. The override was slipping. The spores had disrupted the command link. But this was something else. This was a choice. The pack turned, not toward Alex, toward the sky, toward the unseen masters who had shackled them for so long. And then they ran, not to hunt, not to obey, but to fight. Above, chaos erupted in the Varis control chambers. Command signals were sent, overridden, sent again, only to be met with silence. The Vaxil's neural link was collapsing, spiraling out of their control. For the first time in their long history of dominance, the Varis felt something alien to them. Fear. Alex stood amidst the shifting jungle, bloodied, exhausted, his body screaming for rest. But he couldn't stop. This was bigger than survival. The Vaxil had been slaves for countless years. Now they were something new, something terrifying, something free, and so was he. He took a deep breath, turned toward the distant sound of war erupting in the sky, and ran toward it. Because the hunt wasn't over, it had just changed sides. The jungle burned, flames licked at the towering foliage, black smoke curling toward the crimson-hued sky. The echoes of battle rippled through the air, screams, chittering howls, the unnatural hum of failing Varis technology. The hunters had lost control of their weapons, and now their weapons had turned against them. Elias Carter stood on the edge of a battlefield he never could have imagined, his chest rising and falling in ragged gasps. He had fought to survive. He had fought to outthink, and in the end he had fought to free. The Vaxil moved like a living storm, striking with a coordinated fury that no Varis could have prepared for. Their former masters had relied on blind obedience, never considering what might happen if the creatures they had engineered stopped following orders. They weren't just killing, they were reclaiming. Alex felt the vibration in his bones as one of the Varis ships, a towering insectoid vessel, all sleek exoskeletal plating and organic circuitry, screamed as it was pulled down from the sky, torn apart mid-air by a dozen rampaging Vaxil. The impact shook the ground, sending a wave of heat and debris outward. The war had begun, and somehow he had started it. A low, rumbling growl pulled his attention. The Alpha Vaxil, the one that had first hesitated, the one that had first chosen, stood before him, its ridges flaring in pulses that Alex could almost understand now. Not words, not language as he knew it, but intention. They weren't done. Not yet. Alex swallowed hard, the weight of realization settling over him. He had freed them, but he wasn't their leader. He wasn't their master. He was something else, an equal. For the first time since the hunt began, he truly understood. This wasn't about revenge. This was about evolution. A deep tremor rolled through the jungle as the remaining Varis forces attempted a last-ditch retreat. Their vessels, screaming as they tore through the atmosphere, abandoning the planet they had once ruled without question. They were running, because for the first time they had become prey. Alex exhaled, wiping the blood from his face. His body ached, his mind reeled, but he wasn't done. He couldn't be done. He turned to the Alpha, meeting the creature's unreadable gaze. The question hung between them, silent but undeniable. What next? Alex glanced up at the sky, at the stars beyond. The Varis wouldn't forget this. They wouldn't let this stand. They would return in greater numbers, with greater weapons, with a new hunt designed to erase this humiliation, unless someone took the fight to them. A slow, knowing grin spread across his face. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was a war, and humanity had just gotten its first real pack. With one last breath, Alex turned and stepped forward, joining the creatures that had once hunted him. They ran not as predator and prey, but as something new, something unstoppable.